we know that there's a lot of farms in Maryland that have conservation easements, which is a very positive thing in terms of preserving our rural way of life and helping farms perpetuate through families and continue to be strong. But in this modern age, a lot of farmers are interested in diversifying their operations. And so if you have a farm that is subject to a conservation easement and you're considering diversification, you're going to have some legal questions. So please help me in welcoming our speakers. We have Michelle Cable and Ann Jones. Thank you very much.
So I'm Michelle Cable. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation, what we all call MALF. And with me here is...
I'm Ann Jones, and I'm not sure if my speaker is on or not. Can you hear me? Barely.
Try the other one.
They're telling me to try the other one. All right. Or he's going to... Let's see if it works. Ooh, now there it goes. All right. I'm Ann Jones, and I work with various land trusts in Baltimore County. I am on the Howard County Ag Board. I've been on the Maryland Environmental Trust Board, and I kind of found out early on that if you want to learn anything about easements, there's a lot of different easements out there. So we had a couple questions just to get us an idea of who's here before we get started. And I was going to ask you, who in the audience owns a farm? Okay, excellent. How many attorneys do we have here? Ooh, okay. How many of you have an easement on your property? And leave your hand up if you know who that easement is with. Okay, that's a good start. Then the question we always have to ask, is there anyone here from the IRS? I'm not joking. That can happen sometimes, you know. Something we have to look out for. If anybody has trouble hearing us, please raise your hands in the back and let us know, or if we're too loud, let us know how everything's sounding. I want to briefly first go over some of the types of conservation easements. And I think it's very easy to think that you have a pretty good handle on things, how things work when you're dealing with one kind of easement. But there are a lot of different easements. We have an embarrassment of riches in Maryland in that there are a lot of different programs to preserve the properties. And they're going to have different implications for what you want to do when you look into diversifying your operation. There are everything from a small land trust that might be a group of interested residents of a community who got together and decided we want to preserve this particular small area. It's all volunteers. They could easily fit around your kitchen table. But when they take easements, a lot of times you donate it to the IRS, and here comes the IRS in. So even though you've got a very local group of people, their responsibility, and we'll talk about this more, is going to be if you've donated the easement, you have to answer to what the IRS thinks that easement should do. So these groups are everything from that. You have county easements, and some of those county easements are a straight purchase of development right program. So they bought your easement. Then there's transfer development rights programs. There's easements that are sending parcels under a transfer development right program, so they sent their density elsewhere. There's easements that are remainder parcels for a cluster development. So you had a development of, you had a 100-acre parcel, you could put 4 houses on it, you say you put them all over in the corner and keep the other 95 acres as farmland. All of these have different implications for what the responsibility is of the holding agency. And going back to who holds the easement, when you sign an easement, typically it's going to say grantee and grantor. And the grantee is the person who you are giving or selling it to. The grantor is the property owner. You say, I'm granting you this. I got yelled at by a property owner just 2 weeks ago. He looks at me and says, I don't know what this easement holder thing's all about. You don't hold my property. And I'm like, well, we refer to it as the easement holder. It's the entity that has the responsibility for the perpetual maintenance of the easement. And I think probably the closest thing to say it's like a mortgage holder. So if you think about it as like a mortgage holder, they have an interest in the property. Only the interest of the easement holder goes in perpetuity with the property. Generally, if you look at something that's a county easement, and this is general, and If you think we're going to sit here and give you an answer today, let me just click in here real quick that says yes you can or no you can't. You've probably already figured out the answer is going to be maybe, because unfortunately it's the real lesson is look at who holds your easement, and that we're going to keep saying that over and over. But each one has different requirements to look at. So if it's a county easement, it was a creature of county, whether it was a purchased easement or a donated easement, whether it was a regulatory easement under a transfer development rights program, more than likely the county zoning is they're going to look a lot of that to decide whether or not you can diversify on the property. So just as a general big picture, think about it, the county provided the funds, the county set up the regulatory mechanism for the easement, the county is now going to go ahead and decide what can be done on that property. We go all the way up to there are federal easements. As we know, a lot of the military installations have realized that, hey, the best way to keep, shooting off large cannons or flying our big airplanes off is to make sure we don't have a lot of people real close to us. So you've got the REPI program, which has been combining with other funding to preserve easement. So if you go into those easements, you're going to have the federal government. There's also Federal Farm and Ranch Protection, which is now called ASEP.
Agricultural Conservation Easement Program under the Farm Bill.
ASEP. Those are going to have different regulations. An easement via donation, and just to get to this real quick, Maryland Environmental Trust, I know that I saw John Chapman here before, he's from Maryland Environmental Trust. They have taken a large number of donated easements, but even easements that are purchased easements, it may be that they take what's called a bargain sale. And if you take a bargain sale, you say you're going to buy that easement from me for $100. Hey, that easement was really worth $150. That $50 becomes a donation just like a donated easement is. Once you get into a donated easement, the IRS looks very seriously at that. You become a charity effectively. So every other little land trust out there, they're a charity, and they have to listen to all of the IRS regulations. And the IRS is going to come in as a charity and say, hey, you can't benefit a private individual. Also, if you donate an easement, you're not getting but a fraction of the value back for what you're donating. And a lot of times people do it because they flat love that land. I mean, there's got to be a piece of that in what you do here. And if you did it because you flat love the land, and now you have passed away perhaps, and now a subsequent owner has it, and that owner comes in and says, hey, I don't like that idea. I really want to do something different with it. I own this land now. You as a charity have an obligation to hold up the desires of that person who did that donation. Even if there's a good reason coming in here, you have to look at what's the charitable purpose was. Why did that person give that particular land? So it took me a long time to kind of ferret this out, because the responsibilities of a local government who purchased the easement, who does the thing, are very different from what a land trust might have. And that in turn is different from what a state agency may have, where it's a creature of state and state legislation. That much more happens with, the MALF program, which Michelle will be talking about more. But those are some of the, that's just the general background of that. The other thing is, don't assume that even if the easements are still subject to zoning. Typically the stricter will win. So it could be that an easement allows you to do something that the zoning then says you cannot. So that's just a sort of an overview of thinking first thing about what's the type of easement, what might that mean to what we want to do, and where are we going from there.
So if you have an easement, and these are just logos of a bunch of different entities that hold different easements, where to start? Are you looking to sell or donate your easement? Do you have an easement? Are you looking to inquire of doing a certain activity? Your first place to start, if you're looking to put your property into a conservation easement, is actually to do your homework. What is your desire? What is your mission for the history of your property? How do you want it to see? And make sure that what you want, what your goals match with what the different entities are out there. As Ann said, we have numerous different entities throughout the state that do conservation easements, and it's a great, compatible, cohesive, it's a quilt work. We all make different patches to create the different protected lands throughout the state. So do your homework to find the right organization, and that's going to include your financial consideration, the differences between a purchased easement program and the benefits of a donated easement, or you have that combination of the bargain sale, like Ann said. Are you looking to put your entire property under easement or a portion of the property? Do you want to retain an area that you could use for commercial activities in the future? If you want to do that, you should consider potentially withholding a certain area of your property so it's not encumbered by the terms of the easement. So what are your current uses for your property? What are your future plans for your property? And talk all about that with the easement holder, so you make sure you draft the easement to the best of your ability to do what you want to do now, as well as the growth into the future. And not only after talking with the easement holder, you should really talk to your family as well. So as Ann said, it's not that first owner that does the easement, it's the subsequent owners where often challenges could occur. They didn't have the immediate financial benefits from either a sale or the donation, the tax credits, but they have to, that easement runs the land in perpetuity. So everybody needs to know what's going on. So making sure you're talking with your family to let them know what your intent and desire are is really important, as well as talking with an attorney or a financial advisor. It's a big decision. This is a perpetual agreement that you're placing on your property. So knowing all the impacts of it up front is really important, doing that homework. If you already have an easement and you want to either look into exercising some of the rights that you have, or you're interested in going into a new operation or a new avenue, call that easement holder to discuss what it is that you want to do. And as Ann said, that's kind of an overriding theme that we're going to have today, is just talk to the easement holder, figure out what do you want to do, what is permitted on the terms of the easement. If you don't know who your easement holder is, there is a representative in every county, often in the planning and zoning department, but not always, that works on the easement programs for the county. Every single county has a person that works with the MALF program, that often works as well with Department of Natural Resources for their rural legacy areas, as well as the different land trusts. So they'll be able to help you if you don't know who holds your easement. And then just talk to them, talk about whatever questions you might have, your current uses, what development potential is permitted by the easements, can you create tenant houses, if you want to have any potential subdivision, an agricultural subdivision of your property, if you're planning on changing or growing your operation into new areas or new fields, or other just general prohibited or permitted uses. Easement holders are happy to talk to the landowners, because the more you know up front, the less problems there is in the long run. And so the breakdown, this lovely pie chart, shows the differences of, in the state of Maryland, what the breakdown of the different groups are. Right now, there's over 800,000 acres in easements around the state. MALF is the largest holder of the easements. We're at about 40%. But you see that the county programs, between their purchase development rights or transfer development rights, they're just under 30%. The rural legacy program, it's 12%. Greenprint, which is not in existence anymore, but it was another program out of the Department of Natural Resources, it was 4%. The Maryland Environmental Trust at about 16%. And then the local land trust is the smallest component at 1%. And while they only hold 1%, they often co-hold on a lot of these other easements, so they're very involved, more than what that number makes it look like. So easements, they are perpetual, as I said, which can be challenging. How do you live in an agricultural world, have an agricultural easement that's a perpetual easement, but the industry is ever changing? In the 1970s, the legislature created MALF for the purpose of preserving agricultural land and woodland. And per our statute, the easements restrict land to agricultural and woodland uses, with some exceptions. But when you look at that, even over the 40-plus years of our MALF program, what's considered normal, I quote, normal agricultural practices really has grown and evolved and seen significant changes. One of the best examples I can show for this is when the MALF program first started, equestrian operations, horses were not considered agriculture. That was considered straight commercial. And now horses are actually in our definition of agricultural in our easement. So even just a 40-year window, there's been very significant changes. And so how do you, as a landowner or the landowner representative, how do you come to your easement holder? What are they going to do? So first and foremost, the easement holders look at the actual deed that's recorded in the land records. That's the agreement that was signed. That's what we go to first. And there are very specific prohibited and permitted uses. And then there's the gray area where nothing is specifically written down about a certain topic. So you have to look to the organization's policies and laws of what governs them. For MALF, when anyone comes to us to ask if they can do a certain activity, our overriding thought, our overriding consideration is, how is whatever it is that you're proposing to do, how does that impact the agricultural opportunities and operations on the farm currently and into the future? So that's something that we look at when any request is coming before us. Even when it's already an existing easement, or if it's an easement coming in, if you're considering the withheld areas, to not put the whole property under easement, our board for the foundation is going to look if you withhold these 5 acres or 10 acres, could that have some type of negative impact to the rest of the farm in the future? So our overriding question when you're thinking, can I do this on my farm? Think about how will that impact, beneficial, negative, or no impact for the agricultural operation into the future.
Okay, and going through on that, when Michelle talks about leaving some of the land out of the easement, that's more common in MALF than it is in other easement programs. So again, this is where you start to see some of the differences between them. The new kid on the block in terms of state purchased easement programs, and my new kid, it's 20 years old now, so I guess it really isn't all that new, is the Rural Legacy Program. And partially because it is a newer program, it anticipated some of the changes that have happened. So primary processing of goods, whether you're putting in a creamery or a distillery or whatever, is generally allowed under a rural legacy easement. I say generally because you need to look at each individual easement and talk about it. But as people have learned things over the last 30, 50 years, easements have changed. And that is something that can be a little troublesome to a family or some people that look at them and say, well, how come Joe down the road can do something that I cannot do here? But it is because there is an ever-changing, we all know that agriculture changes. And if anybody looks at you and tells you, I know exactly what agriculture is and exactly where that line between agriculture and unrelated commercial uses is, run. Because nobody knows exactly where that line is, I'll be honest. It's going to be a case-by-case basis, and you really need to look at it closely. A little bit about, Michelle was talking about how MALF would evaluate a proposal, very much looking at the ag impact of that proposal. If you come in and request a use, a land trust, somebody that has accepted a donated easement, looks at the conservation values of the property and how it impacts those conservation values, which may be agriculture, but it may be scenic, it may be wetlands, it may be woodlands. So is it going to impact them? And how directly is it tied to the purpose of the easement? That's going to come up with all of them. So if you're coming, pretty much we can all say a 7-Eleven is not going to be allowed, and we can sit here and say that with some assurance here, but at what point does a farm stand become a 7-Eleven? And that's where there's always from the guy that's just got a wheelbarrow out selling pumpkins to the 7-Eleven, where is that line? And that's one of the things that's always being questioned in the easements. The county government is going to be looking very closely at, does it comply with zoning? And that can mean that perhaps those uses will change over time as the zoning changes. Very often, some of those allowed uses that are allowed in the most restrictive residential area will be allowed on a deed of easement. Perhaps as a special exception process. So this goes back, and we keep saying it, but it really depends on who holds the easement. Figure out what to push. And as Michelle has said, we just want to go back again into the importance. Things are changing. Sometimes we go back to heritage breeds. Sometimes we're doing new processes that everybody knows hemp's going to be an issue. How is that going to be regulated? Medical marijuana, how is that going to be regulated if that ever gets legalized? So all of these things will need to be answered in conjunction. We're not going to answer them today, by the way. Let me just put that out there. But you want to try to draft an easement, and the problem is drafting an easement that is strict enough and makes enough sense that it can last in perpetuity and allow a little bit of flexibility. You want to make sure that whoever is paying for this easement, generally somebody, if it's a donated easement, all taxpayers are paying some because they're getting a tax credit. If it's a purchased easement, somebody has bought it either out of county or state funds. If it's a regulatory easement, somebody is getting additional density because of it, by and large. So you have to make sure that their investment is maintained, whatever is being improved in the future. Agritourism is, of course, a term that we never even heard of. Agritourism is being, pretty much is being allowed on easements, but again, it's that tie-in to agriculture. At what point does agritourism become Six Flags? Yes, Disney was a mouse, and in fact, there are mice on farms. That does not mean that you can allow to put up another Disney. It has to have a direct tie-in to the agriculture nature of the property. You've got direct processing of creameries, wineries, breweries, meats, honey, all types of things. A little history lesson here about, how our food system has changed. At the beginning of the 20th century, they estimate that there were 500,000 mom and pop stores in the country. So 500,000 little local stores where you'd get on your wagon and go down and buy what you need. By now, there's less than 20,000 stores. So it's a huge drop. We all know, we all go to the Giant, the AMP, wherever, AMP, that doesn't even exist anymore. Wherever it is, who knows? But much of that because it's packaged. But direct sales to consumers are starting to pick up, and this is a huge advantage to farmers and something that really has to be taken into account in easements, and hopefully they can do. The census shows the figure's grown to over 50 million with 61 million sold directly to retail markets in the state of Maryland. So it is definitely increasing, and it's an important thing to include in the easements.
So going on to this, how do you diversify? What can you do on your farm? Going for the agritourism and the on-farm sales. A good rule of thumb for pretty much any easement holder is if you're looking to expand, are you inviting the general public onto your property? And are you selling any products beyond what your farm is producing? And then if the answer is yes to either of those, it's really important to pick up the phone to call your easement holder, because most likely you'll probably want or need some type of approval from your easement holder. And the easement holders, and obviously I speak for MALF more than anything else, but in general, we're all looking at similar things. How big is the operation that you want to conduct on your property compared to the overall size of the farm? If you're doing a 10-acre area for agritourism, hay rides, corn maze on a 200-acre property, that's a small percentage of your property. If you're doing a 10-acre area on a 25-acre property, you have a much bigger impact, obviously. So looking at that size on a case-by-case basis. And how does that business that you are conducting on your farm, how does that relate directly to the operation of your farm? So are you selling the products that you grow or you raise, the meats that come from the animals on your farm, having the ice cream from your cows on your farm? Or are you more of an area that is a conglomerate and just having a one-stop shop for the whole neighborhood of the different farms around? And both of them are important, but knowing the difference is a critical thing per the terms of the easement. Looking into the specifics of the easement, you also have to think about if you're having customers, where are they going to park? Do you have to have impervious surface aspects, including structures? Structures are obviously impervious surfaces. Some easements have a maximum percentage of impervious surface, which will include structures, driveways, parking. So if there is that component in the easement, you have to think about that when you are trying to grow or establish a business. If you are serving foods that can be eaten right there on your property, you're having the ice cream or you're having chili or whatever it is that you're doing, Then you get into a lot of other different types of county or state codes, health codes, permitting, other types of needs. How do your customers, do you have permanent restroom facilities? Are you able to have porta pots? What are the hand washing stations? So there are all these things that the bigger your operation is, the more it's kind of that circle is growing and growing. And it's not just, everyone always knows that you got to work with the county, you got to work with what other regulatory agencies are out there, but you also have to talk with your easement owner. So, and beyond the actual, the sales and that interaction, are you going to have any kind of larger scale events, you know, spring or fall festivals that you have maybe a couple hundred people on there? Then you get into potential gathering permit requirements. So there's a lot of different areas that are involved in these growing agritourism kind of bucket of opportunities, which gets into different types of events. So there are some that are obviously agriculturally related. You have your fall pumpkin festival, you have your sunflower festivals, just other types of events that can be clearly related to what is the activity, what is your products that you're growing or raising on your farm. Then there are other events that are more what I would just call kind of the destination event. It's become very popular to host events on farms. People are wanting to do weddings, to do anniversary parties, birthday parties, etc. And there is a difference between an agriculturally related event, which promotes your product on your farm, versus this is just a destination event location. And for Mouth, we have the ability to approve either one of those. In 2018, a law was passed that actually it's our special occasion events law that will allow for straight commercial events to be held on Mouth farms under certain circumstances within a limited area, and obviously with approval. But before that, we did not allow the commercial events. So in general, weddings or just parties, that destination location event area would not have been permitted on Mouth. Where it is, you do have the opportunity to do that now. So the examples in this picture are kind of those festivals. There's the wedding in an old barn. Then there's this big balloon. So you sometimes see these big balloon festivals. That's not allowed. That's a firm no. That's a really, really big impact. No one can kind of see how that could be related to agriculture, and it has a way larger footprint than what our special occasion events would allow. So while we won't say we have any answers, that one's pretty much a clear no. Do I have more? Yeah. So following up from the conversation earlier this morning, the solar energy or any types of the renewable energy, there is the real need out there. We all heard this morning how there's a goal for the state of Maryland to reach the renewable energy with a certain percentage for solar. And we get a lot of calls, as do other easement holders, of people wanting to look into what are they allowed to do for the solar development on their farms. And the absolute right course of action is, before you reach out to a solar company, or if a solar energy company reaches out to you for your farm or one of your clients' farm, call the easement holder first. In general, the commercial solar activities, those projects that were discussed earlier today, are not prohibited on easement properties. Those are commercial activities that are not allowed by the easements. Earlier, they showed a slide where, and even referenced that with the Mouth easements. They are prohibited. But the creation and the establishment of solar on farms for your own residential and agricultural use for your on-site use is permitted. And if for Mouth properties, if you do it like for this one picture here, there's solar panels on top of most likely a little horse barn. If you put it on top of existing structures, barns, poultry houses, residential houses, other agricultural support structures, there's no agricultural impact there because your building is already there. So you can place your solar panels on Mouth properties on top of structures without any approval. We'd like you to let us know, but you don't have any site approval because it's already on areas that are used for agriculture on top of the structures are already disturbed. If you want them freestanding, you do require, MALF does require prior approval first for a location approval. It goes back to the how will this impact the agricultural operation as a whole. So we want to know where it's sited to make sure it's not in the middle of your best field out there. So it makes sense both for obviously the energy company and where it's going to be, but also so that it's not having a future impact, a future negative impact to the farm down the road. So on-site use, yes. Commercial use, no. And it's the same, we've had some for wind and anaerobic digesters. We get more calls for solar than anything else, so that's why we tend to focus on that. But it would be the same for all of the renewable resources.
And I'm going to briefly talk a little bit about ecosystems marketing without getting too carried away with that. There are a huge variety of programs that can potentially be called ecosystems marketing: wetland mitigation, stream restoration, forest banks, forest retention areas. It is a field that is really taking off now, partially because of the Bay Diet, because of the need for MS4 permits coming in from local governments. So the question becomes, can those uses be used on an easement, or is that an unrelated commercial activity? There have been some people, and some people feel very strongly that this is double dipping, and that you have been paid to preserve the farm, and you should not be allowed to take any other money off of that. Other people feel very strongly that preserve farms are the perfect place to put this, because you know that it's going to stay there in perpetuity, and it's not going to have some of the conflicts that you would have on other locations. So basically, it's going to come down, despite that sort of general debate that flows around everywhere, so if you hear it, don't be shocked. Each easement holder is going to look at the impact that it has on, again, the conservation values, on the purpose of the easement. So MALF has a policy. They will allow it, and probably should let you do your own policy, but you know, MALF will allow it as long as the impact on the agricultural operations is minimal. Other things we'll look at other easement programs, we'll look at it the same way. Rural Legacy generally allows it. DNR is considering it for DNR purchased easements. They haven't come up with the language yet about where they're going to allow it or not allow it. So it is very easement specific. It is very one where you want to go back, as we've said over and over again, and apologize for sounding like a broken record, but you need to talk to your easement holder and determine what the requirements are in that specific easement. And thank you. We can ask for questions now. Or did you have anything you want to add now? We did that.
So do we have any? Yeah.
It's for Michelle.
Thank you. Dick Stoner, we have farmland in Washington County. I think most recently under CREP, which is a permanent federal easement. And it's pretty broad language as far as the way they state agricultural activities. So with that definition that you've just said is obviously going to be difficult in the future, whether you include processing, a hemp processing building, or anything else that comes along. Can you all speak under your existing programs, what percentage of violations do you encounter when you do those inspections?
Gosh, percentage. So every easement holder inspects at a different time frame. So for federally funded easements, they have a required annual inspection. I think Rural Legacy is at least every 3 years,
yeah.
as is MET, and MALF inspects less frequently. We have to inspect at least once every 10 years. We try to get out more than that. I can't think about a percentage of, so we either find things out from inspections, or a lot of the violations we learn about are from neighbors. They know that There's an easement on the property, and so everyone's shaking their head, something's going on, and they call us and say, what is, they're building a house, this is under easement. And so one of the other benefits of always talking with your easement holder is sometimes building that house is okay. It's allowed under the terms of your easement. So if we know what's going on, if you're entering into a new field, when that, kind of nosy neighbor calls and we said, oh yes, we spoke with Mr. Jones and we know what he's doing and it's all on the up and up. I can't tell you a percentage of how many we find out from there, and it's, for the MALF program, one of our most common, what you would call a violation, is not having a current soil and water quality plan. You need to have a current one within 10 years, and we put that in our very low bucket to follow up on. The big ones are the houses, the subdivisions that weren't permitted, having different types of activities that are straight commercial and not agriculture. And it's most of the violations that you find out there are more people, they're unintended. People didn't realize, no one is out there, twirling their evil mustache trying to figure out how they can violate an easement. So having those conversations, the more you do site inspections, the more you have a relationship with that easement holder, the more likely they're going to pick up the phone and be comfortable to talk to them. So you can avoid that in the upfront. You want to chime in?
Just real quickly to chime in, I think the experience that I've had, it's less violations. People come in pretty much to ask about when they know they're going to do something really different on their farm, because they're making an economic, they've made a business plan decision to go into something major. And they typically ask before they come in. I haven't found a lot of violations. We do have some where we have a property owner, for instance, that has built what looks going to be a great party barn that he swears is just to keep his chickens in. So until he starts the party, we're stuck.
We have a question over here.
Hi. I don't know if this would be a subset of the special occasion, but I've seen a trend in like Airbnb listings, farm stays, where the product is in some ways the environment. Do either of you have experience and thoughts on that?
So for the MALF program, we allow bed and breakfasts in the dwellings that are either on the easements before they're on the property before the easement's there, so we call them pre-existing dwellings. They were existing before the easement was established. And we allow, kind of the small bit, a lot of people, they'll have a small dentist shop or a lawyer's, office or beauty parlor, kind of that one person shop, but we allow bed and breakfast. So which we haven't had anyone come to us for an Airbnb, but since we allow a regular B&B, it would be an extension of the same thing. There's one case that I know of that people wanted to start. The best that I could describe it was basically a dude ranch for farmers, having people come to the farm and work the farm and doing all that. And their question was, could they build a tenant house for these customers that would pay the owner of the farm to then clean the barns and feed the chickens or whatever it was. And we went to the side of that's commercial, that's not a pay. Our tenant houses are for paid farm employees, not for guests paying you to do the farm chores. So we haven't really ventured into that kind of farm stay if it's in an existing dwelling in the existing Airbnb, any owner is allowed to have guests on their farm and let them do what they feel they're safe to do. As long as it's in a pre-existing dwelling for us, I don't think we would have any issue with that.
And I'll just jump in. One thing that easements generally are pretty clear on is the number of dwellings that are allowed. And so if you start talking about putting 5 or 6 little separate dwellings around, that's going to get you in trouble.
There's one there.
Hey, guys, could you talk a little bit about covenants, conditions, and restrictions that were either pre-existing on the property before it went into easement or that are attempted to put on after the easement?
Do you want to start? You want me to start? You start. So are you, the covenant conditions and restrictions, meaning like county zoning, or what's actually ongoing on the farm, like existing agreements?
Anything that may impact the agricultural use of the property.
So for MALF, we tend to see whatever was going on at the farm at the time we purchased the easement goes back to that pre-existing, and we took subject to it. And we would document, if it's a business, if it's an agreement with a neighbor that they can use your road to access their backfield. If it is, I have a truck repair shop out of my barn or my shed. All of those things, if they pre-exist the easement, we can document it in the easement and document those conditions. And that's also why, do that homework and talk with your easement holder, because it's very easy to draft things in the beginning to make sure your current conditions are not only allowed, it can be maintained. Do you want to expand it? So you would have to take that into account up front. So I think most easement holders would say if it's ongoing, when we took the easement, we took subject to it. But if you didn't disclose that it was ongoing up front, then there might be some challenges, because an easement might say no commercial activities, and you have a paint shop in your barn that you've been doing for 20 years, but you didn't tell us that you were doing it. That's when there's some challenges.
And I'd say in terms of covenants and everything, all of the purchased easement programs definitely do the title search. And it needs to come up in the title. And then the attorney generals and everything will look at it and say, hey, we're going to take that easement, or we're not going to take that easement if that's in too much conflict with the terms of the deed of easement.
Thanks. We have time for one more question. So you keep using the word commercial. So if say I wanted to build a new building to promote farm education activities, would that be allowed? And it's a nonprofit. Would that make a difference? If it's ag-related and a nonprofit?
That's just, I hate to do this, but it's going to depend a lot on the deed of easement. I mean, and the direct relationship that it has with the purposes of the deed of easement.
So, and we have, that would fall in, so we have education, agricultural education falls into what MALF considers part of agritourism. And we do allow agritourism. You'll need to it's the case-by-case basis. You have to come talk to the easement holder to say what it is you're doing. It's not just to promote agriculture, the agriculture industry, the agriculture of Maryland as a whole. That's all very important, and those education facilities are important. But when you drill down to the specific easement, how is what you're doing or what you want to do, how does that connect to the agricultural operation on that specific farm? So are you trying to do an education of, showing the life of, dairy cows, or how do you, whatever it is that's being run on that property, is your education related to growing or raising whatever that product is? Or is it the larger, here's the history in 1800, in the mid-Atlantic area, we started here, and we get to, almost 2020, and now we're here. So, as Ann said, from the very beginning, we're not going to give you many yeses or nos. There's a lot of maybes, and we're happy to talk about it on a case-by-case basis. And MALF does have a policy for what we call our permitted uses that goes through a lot of different types of categories. And I know that will be available on the website, as well as our statute that is the specific for the special occasion events, and what MALF's definition of agriculture is, what rural legacies.
Yeah.
So that was all provided to the organizer, and so that will be available if you want to take a look at it, and then give us a call with any details afterwards. We're happy to talk.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists.